So I think it would be good to start with just some introductions. I can begin and just introduce myself a little bit more, and then I'll just allow each of you to introduce yourselves. I think you can speak to who you are and what you do better than I can. So I would love to hear that from you all, if that's all right. Okay, so I'm Jordan Ferranto. I'm the Creative Arts Therapy Supervisor at Resilience. So I work with clients doing art therapy and trauma therapy work with them. And I also supervise staff and interns who are within the Creative Arts Therapy team at Resilience. So today I'm interviewing Lyn Harrington and Erica Hungerford. And we're going to talk about your thoughts on pleasure activism. So I'll allow each of you to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about the work that you do. And whoever would like to begin, please feel free to do so.
Go for it.
All right. Hi, I am Erica Hungerford. I am in the midst of a career switch from doing administrative work for a lot of years to becoming a sex therapist. And in that career switch and kind of in the driving factors behind those is where I kind of got my start into pleasure activism. I'm still a little new in the scene, but I realized a long time ago that I've been doing a lot of one-on-one work in the sphere of helping people feel okay with feeling good in a lot of ways, not just in a sexual capacity, but in just like a general life capacity. And that kind of bled into my start into pleasure activism. So that's where I'm at currently.
Great,
Wonderful.
Thank you.
And hi, my name's Lyn Harrington. I'm a sexuality educator and author, currently based out of Denver, Colorado. And I've been having the opportunity and the gift to get to teach people and talk with people about relationships and authenticity and desire and connection for, almost 20 years now, because time flies really strangely. And I'm just delighted to get to be here to talk about a diversity of things in that field. I've written books on everything from traversing gender, understanding transgender realities, to sacred kink, understanding the eightfold paths of BDSM and beyond, to writing poetry, because we all need to be a little bit diverse, right?
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to hear each of your different expertise on the topic. So let's just kind of dive right in. The question that I wanted to start with is just if each of you could define pleasure activism in the context of your work. I know there are different ways that people define it. And yeah, so let's just kind of start there.
Lyn, I'll let you take that one first.
All right. I've been looking at pleasure activism as the notion of the power of yes, right? What feels centered and engaging and powerful in our bodies, because I find a lot of us, myself included, end up navigating the world through the power of no, right? I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this. That's not good for me, etc. Or for those of us who have any history in being survivors, God, don't let it be like the past, right? I don't want to feel that pain again. And for me, pleasure activism is twofold. One is the idea of what is the power of your yes? And how are we operating in the world at large as complex beings in our politics and our capacity for operating in a world that is full of oppression, etc., to achieve those yeses? To be fueled by them, right? I'm going to go out into the world and use my yes to empower me to continue to do activism work and to thrive as a human being. But also, right now in the world at large, who is not being empowered to follow their yeses?
Well said. What would you add to that, Erica?
Goodness. From my perspective and from kind of just getting into specifically the sex therapy side of things and kind of that side of things, I'm finding a lot of threads of empowerment are really important. And I find that they are crucial to how I work with clients and how I work with people that I talk to help them not only empower them to set boundaries, which is that no piece that Lee was talking about, but also to empower them to state what their desires are. And this can be in a number of ways. This can be not just in an intimacy perspective, but also in oh yeah, I really want to go pursue that crafting thing that I thought was really cool, or I really want to go join this activist group because it's going to give me enjoyment. It makes me, and I feel empowered to reach out and to do that. And I have a confidence level of, oh, even if it's new to me, or if I'm not really sure what I'm doing, it's okay. I can still get into this space, and giving people that strength, that confidence that, yeah, you can do it. Let's go do that. Like, that's something you want to do. Great. Let's go figure out how we can get you there.
Mm-hmm.
I love that so much. There is that empowerment piece that is in that, right? The idea of not just what do you already know how to do it, but let's build our skill sets towards pursuing things. Because there's a mythology that pleasure, in the word pleasure activism, pleasure is about like, what do we do between the sheets, right? Mm-hmm. As compared to pleasure is also the act of getting to wake up at work and work at the hours you want, right? Mm-hmm. The pleasure of waking up at the hour you want, the pleasure that comes in a delicious bite of food, the pleasure that comes from getting to go to that craft show, right? Mm-hmm. And to look at pleasure in that large scale of our life, rather than reserving pleasure for just this window of how we exist as human beings. Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's particularly relevant to our survivors that we work with, because when we survive trauma, our world shrinks down to this very small space that we feel okay enough to exist in. And so a lot of the things that brought us joy or pleasure before sort of become inaccessible for various reasons as a result of surviving harm. So I love the part about empowerment as well as a way to open back up to some of those things and to make some of those things more accessible again, or restore them perhaps. Yeah, cool. Wonderful start. Okay, let's keep moving. Okay, I love this one. Who taught you to feel good? And then there's two more parts to this question. Second part is, what does feeling good mean to you and the folks that you work with? And part three is there a practice that you utilize to tap into that goodness? So let's start with, who taught you to feel good?
It's interesting when you ask that question, because my brain goes to two different answers. One is, who taught me not to feel good, right? The part of me that has lived in a life that involved trauma, right? That has involved coming out of that shadow. And there is a part of my brain that goes, and, you know, Erica mentioned this notion earlier of the creating boundaries so that safety can exist within them. And I think for me, learning some of my no's helped me find the yeses inside it, right? Finding that pleasure inside that piece. But I think on the how do you enjoy little pieces of pleasure was my mother, that even when we were getting mac and cheese out of the cheapest box possible kind of living, she would save a couple of dollars to be able to buy one nice piece of cheese. Or we would go foraging to try to find some herbs or something so that she could make even the cheapest food something delicious that she would pause and actually enjoy, instead of focusing on the sorrow side of that. The idea of how do we find this moment of delight, right? Instead of focusing on sorrow.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's super important with being present and being able to enjoy that moment. So yeah, I like that concept.
It's really easy to sort of hyper focus on something that feels painful or negative, right? It's kind of how our brains are conditioned to work to protect ourselves from pain and some of that stuff, right? And so we end up indulging that side of it too much. Erica, what would your response to that question be?
Sure. It was similarly, actually, my parents, I had to stop and think about this one for a few minutes, because my initial thought was, oh no, I've taught myself to feel good. But that was actually in response to kind of relearning from the messaging we get as a female-bodied person and as a queer person. The messaging that I'd gotten over the years was, you're not important, and your existence isn't important, and so you shouldn't feel good in your existence. So I taught myself a lot of, retaught myself a lot of how to feel good in those arenas. But really dialing it back to my parents, who brownie points to them would be like, oh, you're interested in gymnastics, cool, you can go do that, we'll go get it taken care of. And then like 2 years later, when I'm like, I hate this, I want out, they were like, okay, it's cool, we understand that you don't want to be there anymore, and would allow that space for both my brother and I to flex in and out of, oh, this is something that you think you might enjoy, let's go try it, let's go see if you like it, and if you don't like it, I'm not going to make you stick with it, I'm not going to force you into staying with it. So they were very good at being able to set up that space of exploration without making it feel like it was a chore or a requirement. Well, now you started it, so now you got to finish it. No, it was all right. You started it, you didn't like it, so let's leave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting you bring that up, because I'm also hearing on that the weaving between consent and pleasure, that you had the opt out, and so therefore the opting in was almost deeper.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like that way of thinking about it, because I don't think I'd put that into words. But yes, because when it wasn't something that felt like it was a requirement, the being able to, you felt freer and safer to explore those options and to be able to go, oh yeah, I want to try this thing, I want to do something different, or no, I don't want to do this anymore. And it was safe to say no, and it was safe to be in that space.
Mm-hmm. There's so much learning that happens in that contrast, right, of trying things and figuring out what's a yes, what's a no. There's a lot of learning that happens there, which is nice that your parents encouraged that. It's important.
Yeah.
Sure, it's something you carry with you throughout your life even.
And I would also add, though, for those of us who have had some of those points of trust broken, right, or violated in some way, shape, or form, the piece that I heard you alluding to, Erica, of the relearning, right? There's that opportunity potentially to take the time in relearning pleasure to also relearn consent, right? To learn no, really, this is the thing I don't want, and this is the line, which as adults we have more control over than some of us might have had as children.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and there's a learning curve there once you kind of grow into your adulthood, to that realization that comes to you that, oh, I get to choose. I'm in charge now of my life. I'm in charge of me. And that can take some adjusting too, as we kind of come into adulthood. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Part 2 is, what does feeling good mean to you and to the folks that you work with?
I had gotten a little bit stuck on that, because feeling good can be so very subjective, and every person feels it a different way and has a different presentation of it. So that there was so much that I was like, oh, this person like this, and this person feels good this way, and I feel good this way. There was so much to it that I was like, how do I distill this down? And to put it succinctly, it really is recognizing that what feels good to you is subjective. It is up to you. You have that choice. You have the ability to say, yes, I like this thing. And even if someone in your space or life or social media world is going, well, why do you like that thing? It doesn't matter why you like it. It matters that you like it. And being able to be encouraged to chase or follow those things that feel good to you is what's important, and having that support system behind you going, yeah, okay, cool, you want to try out like finger painting, great, have at it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love that. There's an add-on for me there, a couple different points. One, because I concur, and the first one I would have is that the word good is not just is what are you into subjective, right? Mm-hmm. But there's this notion of like good could be interest, could be bliss, right? Like where are you on this range of what our society calls good? Because intrigued is a form potentially of that goodness, that thing that has you feel good. And that in and of itself is subjective, right? Because for some people, well, if your hobby that you're pursuing doesn't make you feel blissful, why are you still doing it? Well, some days you're going to be kind of curious about it, but have no motivation. Mm-hmm. And some days, potentially, you might like, and to not necessarily need to have judgment, to have it be in its goodness. Mm-hmm. Because I certainly have, it's that notion, gosh, what was the comic that I saw? I'm not remembering the name, the comic strip from back when I was younger. But this notion that I will always love and care about you. Today, I don't necessarily want to be around you. Mm. Right? And that pleasureness comes in the notion that it's looking potentially big picture as well as small picture. Mm-hmm. Right? In this moment, how am I? And in this meta construct, how am I? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what feels good might change day to day.
Yes, exactly where I'm trying to go with. Yes, thank
you.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yep, agreed.
Wonderful. Well, and that makes me think too about this third part of the question, which is these practices that we can start to develop for ourselves around tapping into goodness. Sometimes we need to be a little bit more deliberate to tap into that. It doesn't always just emerge naturally. So what are your thoughts on that part of the question? What are some practices maybe each of you might utilize to tap into that good feeling?
My first exercise I give people is find music that lights you up.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of people in our culture have, embedded stories around food or have trauma stories around eroticism and sexuality. But music, there is a lower percentage of people who have run into that that experience. And so going back to that notion of pleasure is subjective, well, you might absolutely love one that I'm like, not really interested in, but that doesn't mean it doesn't give you pleasure. And if we have someone in our lives who are into a different type of music, they simply have a different type of music interest than us that lights them up, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one of the first things I give people is what are some spaces and things that you listen to that bring you that pleasure? Okay, well, now you know what pleasure feels like in your body. Mm-hmm. There's an awareness point. Oh, it's that moment that my chest comes up, or it's the moment where I start to smile into the corners of my mouth, or even if I have no facial responses, here's what it internally feels like, right? Either my breath rate, like literal feels, right? Like my breath rate, etc., or emotionally, here's how it manifests. So that's one of mine.
Mm-hmm. That's a great one. I definitely use that one a lot. How about you, Erica? What do you do?
Yeah, mine is in a similar vein. I like to focus on trying to be present in that moment, and being present can sometimes involves needing to notice what your physical body is doing. So if I am trying to stay grounded or stay present with an activity that I'm working on, I will sometimes focus on, doing my crochet work, I can feel the yarn beneath my fingers. I can feel the hook. If it's a blanket I'm working on, I can feel the weight of the blanket in my lap, because sometimes it gets awkward working with giant blankets. And so I work to refocus myself on what is happening in that moment, just to then see, okay, and also to check in with myself. Am I enjoying this right now? Do I feel good doing this thing? Or am I just like, this is a chore right now? And if it's a chore at the moment and it doesn't feel like it's giving me something, putting it away and changing activities, putting it away and going, you know what, maybe I need some food. Maybe I need to go watch TV for a little while. Maybe I need to go work on the checklist of something I need to get done. But knowing that I can come back to it later and that my mood will likely have changed and I will feel more enjoyable or good in that space. So kind of one part of recognition of where your brain space is at, and recognizing whether it's being good for you in the moment, and then also knowing it'll be good for me again later. I'm not in the right headspace right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, Lee, you're offering a way for people to start to be able to build up that awareness of what feels good and to notice how it shows up in their bodies or in their sort of emotional space. And then, Erica, you're sort of building on that by kind of expanding on that kind of mindfulness-based practice to continue to kind of check in, to notice those cues that come from our own bodies, and build on that, or maybe switch it up too if whatever is happening in the moment isn't quite working for you. Yeah. Lovely. I also liked the point that I think each of you kind of touched on earlier too about, having different preferences for things, that goodness is subjective, is really helpful, I think, to state, because oftentimes when we think of the words good and bad, they're so loaded, right? And we think that, I think it's quite easy to get caught up in those kind of maybe societally deemed labels for good and bad for different things. So I appreciate that note as well that each of you made.
Well, and sometimes the words good and bad can be challenging, detrimental to the conversation itself, mm-hmm. right? So what wakes us up and energizes us right now, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. right? Having grown up in the Northwest of the United States to parents who came from a Catholic and a Lutheran background, this notion of good is also embedded into the story of faith, mm-hmm. right? Or a story of acceptability. Mm-hmm. And so I think for myself, when we're talking about our own internal senses, mm-hmm. checking in with myself, does the word good serve me in this time? Mm-hmm. Or are there other words in that entire rainbow I talked about that would be more engaging for where I'm actually trying to live, rather than some of the words that we have that get attached to certain other concepts?
Right, precisely. Yeah, and also I love the use of what energizes you or wakes you up, because I think that also gives us a lot more information than good or bad. Those words tend to be really vague. And if we can get more specific, I think with our language, it's helpful in terms of expressing ourselves, but also understanding what we're experiencing too for our own purposes. Yeah.
Yeah. And changing the language can really get you away from those loaded words, from those words that have context that society puts into them. And then your brain has built up this, good means this, because good means acceptable, good means appropriate, good means these types of things, because that is how we've heard it in context a lot as we're learning as we go through the messaging we get through socialization. So changing that language to something else that is a more broad and less socialized to a specific concept word is super important.
Yes. And I think those ideas of what is good, or conflating good with acceptable or socially acceptable or culturally acceptable, is what leads to a lot of shame when people feel good by engaging in other things that aren't deemed appropriate in different various cultures, right? So, yeah. Paying attention to that language and what it means to each of us is super important for lots of reasons. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, this one's cool. Tony Cade Bombara, if I'm saying that properly, said that we must make the revolution irresistible and to say yes to ourselves, to our whole selves. Okay, so that's an intro, but the question is, what is the embodied yes at the center of your work?
My website is called passionandsoul.com because I asked myself that exact question. Right? That what are the things, and I came up with two answers. One was the notion of passion. Is what I am doing something that lights up me or serves the world in building passion towards things that make action in our hearts or in our world, right? Mm-hmm. And then soul for me is about my own deeply rooted sense of spirituality and my own deeply rooted experience within faith. And to me, those were the two pieces that were like, oh, that's the core. That is what I do. If folks ever have a chance to sit down and just start throwing down words and figuring out what some of theirs are, it was such an interesting process to do that play, like very much in a childhood play kind of way, right? So I encourage folks to work to figure out some of their own. What about you, Erica?
Yeah, so I actually had, again, another one I had to think about it. I had to go, okay, where is my yes in this work? And it comes a lot from what I refer to as balance, or in this case, kind of a self-care perspective, in that in order for me to be wholly involved, to be able to have the energy and emotional capacity to say yes to something, to really fully enjoy what's happening, I also need to take care of myself. And so I have to strike this balance between being able to being able to structure myself going, okay, did I take care of the thing first? Have I taken care of my physical health? Have I put in a boundary in this space where I know that this thing is draining for me and I need to do less of the draining thing and more of the empowering and more of the energizing thing? And that kind of balance gives me more energy to say yes and to be really fully impassioned and in the space to say, yes, this is great. I've got this energy for the work that I'm doing and for the clients that I'm seeing, because without taking care of myself, I don't have that same level of energy for what I'm doing.
Yeah, I love the piece that you were speaking to, Lee, about kind of finding the words that really get at the core of your work. I feel like that just feels really organizing and grounding, because our, work in any of these related fields can become very easily complex and layered, right? And so kind of having a center to kind of draw from can feel really supportive to continue on. And I think also, Erica, your point is wonderful as well. Of course, we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to have that kind of yes energy to come into this space and to do these, to do this hard work, because it's not easy every day. We're talking about a lot of the wonderful parts of it right now, but there's also a lot of really difficult, painful, challenging pieces as well. So
our next question is, how do you work to reclaim your whole, happy, and satisfied self against oppression? That's a big question.
It is. I works to come at that from a couple of different angles. As a queer and female-bodied individual, there's a couple of layers. There are the layers involving myself as a woman, as a female person, and you have those societal layers of women's pleasure isn't important, and this isn't just in the bedroom. This is across the board. It doesn't matter if you're dissatisfied with your job. You should, or it doesn't matter that you don't want to be a homemaker, or that you don't want to work with children, or these types of things. That's your job. Your expectation in society is to you know, be the person who has the job and raises the kids and takes care of the household and, you know, does all of these layers of things. And your happiness isn't often considered from a socialized perspective. From a queer perspective, same thing. It is very heteronormative out in the world, and the folks who have queer identities can struggle with not seeing representation of themselves in media, with not hearing it's okay to be queer and to be who you are. You get a lot of that response of, let's squish you back in this acceptable, here we go with that word, acceptable box of things, so that those of us who are uncomfortable with you don't have to think about their uncomfortability. Like, we have to adapt to make others in society feel more comfortable, and that can be frustrating and disempowering to a lot of folks. I work really hard to create community, not only create community within my own networks, but to expand that community to others. So I invite people into my community spaces who feel like they need those spaces. Here at Resilience, we've done queer support groups, and we try to do a lot of those things to pull in those community spaces. I've been lucky to have the support system that I have. And because of the people that I surround myself with in life, which are largely queer feminist populations, I'm able to be out and be an open person about my life and who I am, so that folks who aren't able to be in that space can at least see me as a representation of someone who is similar to them. So I get a lot of my empowerment, taking my happiness back from these systems of oppression by being able to be a light or a beacon to other people who are dealing with these oppressive points, and being able to be in the forefront and, where others may be quietly in the background doing activism work, because I am in a social concept, I'm privileged enough to be able to be open and be who I am. I take that and I take up that space. I give us another representation and give us another person to be out there. So that's how I take some of my happiness back, is by sort of being a guiding light for other folks, or at least being a safe space for other folks.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, if we're talking about not just taking back pleasure, but recalibrating ourselves to being aware of what pleasure is, for me, some of the tools were in that were first noticing my body, right? Working on, like, pausing in that, in a moment where I'm realizing I'm having delight, pausing and going, oh, where is this in my skin, right? And then starting to, like, maybe my shoulders are up and excited and my eyebrows are up, or whatever it might be. Like, we're noticing my body, and then starting to calibrate myself more and more towards things where my body responded in those ways. Mm-hmm. So that was one of them. And then also this notion, when Erica brings up the idea of, being there to be of community, mm-hmm. resetting and recalibrating trust becomes part of that process. Mm-hmm. Right? Because consciously chose family, consciously chose community is different than the ones you were assigned. Mm-hmm. Right? And for folks, those ones that you started out with are not the ones that helped you calibrate trust, helped you set a notion of that consent equals ability to go into pleasure in deeper ways. And so for me, that notion of finding individuals, including yourself, to recalibrate that trust with has been really important.
Yeah, and the piece about trust, and I love that you're including, trusting ourselves too. Just going to throw in a different question, if that's okay. What do you all think are some ways to develop trust in yourself even? Because I find that can be a little bit more of an abstract concept for folks. Rather, trusting another person sometimes feel a little bit more clear. Trusting ourselves sometimes can feel a little different. So how do you all, encourage that either in yourselves or in others?
Yeah, I can take that. One of the things I've done is asked myself questions and then answered them and then come back 24 hours later to see if I agree with me. And so this is going to sound potentially cheesy to some folks out there, but I got one of those like middle schooler books that said, I am blank, right? And it's like, my favorite color is such and such, and my favorite place to go for food is blank, and my friends are blank, and you fill in all these things, right? And I did that with myself, came back and saw how much I actually wrote down answers that were true. Because the first time I did that exercise, I wrote down answers that were my answers from that I used to tell people, but actually weren't true anymore. Right? My favorite color was not brown anymore. Actually, my favorite color nowadays is mint green. It has changed over 40 years, right? And so to practice building that trust with me, that exercise was really useful to get into the habit of like, oh, wait, answer your actual answer to you rather than the answer you used to tell other people or the answer you think is acceptable. What's it like to tell yourself the answer that is actually the answer? And for folks, as a note, if you don't have home safety in such a way that keeping something physical like that is an appropriate thing, perhaps even thinking about those kinds of questions, then coming back and reconsidering them the next day with another blank page is another way to do that.
I love that suggestion. It seems like a very kind of concrete way to explore that. Yeah.
It's just to say that, yeah, like that's a really great way to check in, to check yourself, to check in on your own truth. Yeah, I struggle to know exactly how to tell someone how to find out what their truths are, how to find that kind of thing, or how to find that trust within yourself. It's such an abstract concept that I feel it more than know how to explain it in words.
There are those folks, and I will speak from my own personal experience. I know for myself when trust was violated and sexual, assault happened, et cetera, that notion of, do you know how that feels, right? The emotional like registrant that you're talking about, like that is that being honest to myself? Like, am I feeling that inside me? I didn't always know how to read those things inside me. Right? That notion of like, well, it feels impassioned. Well, am I impassioned right now? Or am I having a panic response? Is this anxiety or is this desire?
Yeah.
So for myself, having done that dance, the concrete steps for me became a useful tool.
Yeah, I agree. I think those steps also break it down. So it's this kind of large concept that it helps to sort of break it down into those steps and concretize them so that we can kind of tease through all the different components of it, because it's layered and multifaceted, just like most other things. So
yeah. And even the question of, when people say like, well, do you want to go out and do this? Right? Do this activity. And if I'm not sure how I'm really feeling, because those are not at a calibrated state for whatever reason, literally writing things on pieces of paper. Go to movies, don't go to movies. Stay home, go out, right? The pros and cons of both sides, like the activities on both sides that are happening. Or maybe it's even see this person, don't see this person right now, or see this person, and to write them down on pieces of paper and literally lay out the order of which ones where it's like, actually, this is the thing I really want to do. I found really useful. Or if I'm doing it with partners, right, and people are like one person's wanting to go out, the other person's not, the number system of, I want to stay home at a 4. Well, I want to go out at an 8. If this is a relationship or a friendship or whatever it might be, where we're pretty good at both hearing each other and one person's not always at a 9, the other person isn't always at a 2, because that can happen in society, right? A lot of folks I know who, especially who were assigned female at birth, were socialized. But to ask some of those questions too is, what's this like if we gamify it? What's this like if we play? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this point about trusting ourselves is really kind of a key part of building community and reaching out for others. It's a little more difficult to do that when we don't have that kind of internal compass that you're speaking to, that calibration around what feels right, what feels truthful, honest, good to me. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. So, okay, this one is specific to healing from sexual assault. So this one asks, how does engaging in pleasure activism offer a pathway towards healing from sexual assault?
One of the things I found is the notion that pleasure is that yes, right? Or is at least the okay. And sexual assaults and sexual violence, even for those of us who it happened in a fawn response, i.e. something violent was happening and so we gave in, or even faked this is okay as a way to avoid further violence, because I consider that to be part of that same conversation. For those of us who did any of that, had any of that experience, pleasure becomes the idea of, instead of what did I cope with, or what did I work with, or what did I suffer through, those no's, what's it like for me to choose something, right? And that something could be something sensual or sexual. That choosing something could be, I'm going to choose to go to the library today to pick up a book, right? But it's that notion of honing choice. What is it like to build up our muscle of choice and then actually getting to do that choice? And not just getting to do, because that infers an outside statement, which for some people might be the case. But also, what is it like for ourselves to go out and do that thing, or have that thing internally thought about? So the moving towards as compared to the moving from.
Yeah, that's really well put. Because that choice and taking that choice back and getting to feel that that level of this is mine, this is my power, this is my option, this is what I'm doing, is super important and helps folks to start to feel more grounded, even in little spaces in their life. If you can make the choice to even, like you said, to go to the library, to go to the movies, if I can make the choice to do something or to say no to something and have that no or yes respected, those little things can build into bigger things and can build into more intimate things to help on pathways to healing from sexual violence.
I'll also voice, though, that for myself, some of the things that, we just brought, like that notion of we're going to go to a library, infers a degree of privilege, right? That I know that I have enough energy and time and whatnot to go and do that activity, which is not everyone's lived experience. It has not been my entire lived experience. And so within your own journey, what are some spaces that might take place? For example, you need to drive someone. What about choosing which route you take? Do you have the choice to go down which road you take? Or perhaps if it goes back to that musical piece we talked about before, what music are you going to put on when you have it in your earbuds for going to your second job by bus? What are those choices like? And to practice that notion of choice in the tiniest of spaces starts building that muscle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that emphasis on choice, especially, coming from an experience of sexual assault. There obviously is, it's marked by choicelessness, right? And so that reclaiming of, I can make choices, I can decide for myself what happens to my body, what happens to me, even on tiny micro levels, is super important. Yeah. And there's pleasure in that too. Okay, so we don't have a lot of time left. I want to be respectful of that. So there are 3 questions that we haven't gotten to yet. Do we want to choose one to kind of round our conversation out with? Would that feel okay?
I'm good with that. And as a note, I can just send you the 3 quotes from Lady Speech Sankofa. And if folks don't know about Lady Speech Sankofa, they are amazing. Black, fat, queer activist out of Denver who, if anybody saw during Occupy Wall Street, the Black woman smudging the police, that was her. And yeah, has an amazing YouTube. Anyway, so like on the list of like, who are your teachers kind of thing, I'm just like, I just need to mention Lady Speech because most people need to know that she exists.
Fair enough, yeah.
It's like she only has 12,000 followers. And I'm like, that should be like 50,000.
Yeah.
I'll just send you Lady Speech's quote because I think you might find them useful potentially as like a thing.
Yeah.
Like when you're doing posts and stuff.
Please do. And we can absolutely integrate those. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
That way we can, if we want to skip that question.
Okay. Then I wonder if you all would feel comfortable with the piece around hot and heavy homework, because it might give, folks who are listening some more kind of tangible exercises or things that they could think about or try within their own lives. Would that be okay? Okay.
I'm good with that. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so this question says, in pleasure activism, Adrienne Marie Brown offers hot and heavy homework as practices for readers to tap into their pleasure. So the question is, what trauma-informed practices would you offer to survivors?
One of my favorite ones is the idea of starting with levels of touch you enjoy. And by levels, I don't mean like good or bad in any way, shape, or form. I'm talking about literally like on your hand. Do you enjoy that barely touching sensation? Or is it the smooth pet? Or is it the grab? Or is it the back of the hand touch? And to practice literally on your own hands to start with, what level or density of touch do you enjoy? Mm-hmm. And then to move to another part of the body. Does that answer that you answered on your hand have the same answer on your forearm or your inner forearm? Mm-hmm. Right? And then to move to another part and another part, to start having a conversation with your skin. And if you're moved to have that incorporate things involving nudity or eroticism in that more sexual format, and you're at that point in your own personal journey, fantastic, right? And if you're at the point where figuring this out on your fingertips is where you're at, that's fantastic too, because you're exactly where you're at. Mm-hmm. And for me, part 2 of the exercise, right, that's part 1, is to then come back and to let the feeling manifest that you're at. If it's here and it's letting yourself breathe out when you have that moment, instead of staying stoic as so many of us are taught. Mm-hmm. The practice of letting the emotion flow, to have that motion of the emotion mm-hmm. flow out, mm-hmm. right? So if it is a gasp, if it is a sigh, if it's some sort of sexual noise, to practice letting that flow too, because for some of us who have had violations of different sorts, relearning what does my skin actually want today, mm-hmm. and then how do I let myself have that manifest, mm-hmm. are 2 really wonderful practices to work on.
Thank you for offering that. I think that's wonderful, super important. And I love the emphasis on starting where you're comfortable and starting in this very kind of small kind of steps. Super important. It's very easy to get overwhelmed by a practice like that. So,
oh yeah, the number of times I've had people be like, all right, you're going to go home tonight and masturbate. And I'm like, hold on a second, don't have a private space.
right.
Like, where are you envisioning this?
Yeah, exactly.
Or the assumption, my mother once told me that anytime we use the word just, there's an assumption happening that people have that space or access or skill set. And so for people who have never had, who have not masturbated to a point of any sort of completion or even pleasure, skipping to that point in the process can, I find, sometimes be disempowering. Though for those folks who are, fantastic, you get to be AP students.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of my thinking is in that same vein. It is start slow, start simple, do things that are basic, and you know, even if your logic brain tells you this seems really, really like 101 level, this seems really silly, why am I doing this? Tell your logic brain to shut up for a few minutes and enjoy and focus on enjoying or noticing what you enjoy about those very like ground level type things like Leah was talking about, because sometimes you just have to start with this very low level foundation and then build your way up. And as Lee was saying, basic touch is going to be like, here's your foundation, or basic allowing yourself to figure out, cool, what part of me enjoys this, what part of me doesn't, even just in existing, touching, just being a person. And then like level 4 is maybe masturbation, and maybe level 12 is involving a partner. So being okay with starting with the basic groundwork is super important, and just working your way up from there.
I also like to remind myself, though, that if I'm in partnership or whatnot, and I'm now learning some of these skill sets, it's okay to go back and pour extra concrete into the foundation, right? To buttress up where you're already at, that there's not necessarily a requirement in building these things to have to leave any spaces or connections that you're in.
Right. Yeah, I love to, Erica, your point around kind of quieting down your logic brain, because that comes up, right? It's impossible to stop thinking. Like, we're thinking all the time, right? And so I like to encourage folks to take note of those thoughts and sort of don't give them extra weight, don't sort of feed into them necessarily, but just sort of that mindful awareness of what the thoughts are and let them flow. And yes, if you feel compelled to, tell that part of your mind to quiet down for a bit. It's not necessary right now. Yeah.
And it may be hard to tell yourself that. So it might just be simply doing something along the lines of, okay, I hear you, brain. I acknowledge that you feel like this is silly right now, and we're going to do it anyway. So, you know, acknowledging that piece of the chatter your mind is throwing at you and just going, okay, yep, I hear you. I'm not going to give you any more, as Jordan said, weight or space. I see you, and I'm going to keep doing what I want to do.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, any other just kind of concluding thoughts or words of support that you would like to offer to our community as we kind of sign off for today?
You are not alone. Around the world, people are doing the same work as you, the same work as me, as all of us, in growing in our pleasure, in finding the pleasure of how we want to evolve in the world, and in being authentic beings in our bodies. So I wish you the very best on your journey. I wish all of us the very best on our journeys, and I am delighted to have gotten to be here. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lee. I think Lee said that beautifully. I'm going to just beg off.
Well, thank you both so much for your time. I really appreciate your thoughts. It has been so inspiring for me to listen to you speak on these topics, and it's just so much gratitude over here. It's so wonderful to meet you, Lee, in this way. Erica, a pleasure as always to speak with you too. And we'll kind of call it at that.
Great.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you so much, Jordan. It was wonderful. It was great to see you, Erica.
Good to see you too.
All right. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
You guys too.
Bye.
Bye.